Alright lads, there is one last thing to cover for the 6th anniversary that is coming out in about the next day or so, and that is a whole smorgasbord of different buffs that we're going to be getting for our, anniversary strengthening campaign. We usually get these for each anniversary, and this one brings a lot of very insane buffs. A lot of these servants are going to go from just being very good options to being very nutty options, for lack of a better term. And then some of the more worse servants actually get nice little buffs here and there. Like, I actually do like what they did for someone like Mozart for his style of gameplay. You're probably not going to use him very much, but if you do decide to use him, then he actually becomes a little bit better. So we're going to talk about all of these buffs in today's video so that you know what's going to be coming and what's good and what's broken for the 6th anniversary. But before we begin, if you have not already, make sure to leave a like on the video and you subscribe to the channel for that daily FGO content, because what else am I doing than making sure that you are informed on the goings on both versions of the game, both NA and JP. Also, if you want to catch me playing FGO live, I do that every single weekday starting at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I actually will be going live on Sunday for the 6th anniversary live stream to see if they bring any new quality of life updates early, but I'll actually be going live a bit earlier than that to start the FGO Nuzlocke, which I will be releasing a video on the rule set for that later today, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But let's start getting into some of these goodies, starting off with Saber Lily over here. Now, Saber Lily has her first skill getting a buff. Originally, it's just a little bit of a star bomb, not super impressive, but they make it a little bit better by tacking on a little battery over here. Not a 30% battery, which is a little unfortunate and a little short-sighted, I think, because you're releasing this right alongside Koyenskaya, who at the very least really wants people to have a 30% battery to make things work. And unfortunately, she doesn't have the usual Artoria effect where she refunds NP on her own NP, because that actually allows some of your buster servants that might have smaller batteries to actually still manage to buster farm. People like Morgan and stuff are really good with that as well. They're able to kind of get their buster farming done because they do refund a little bit of their NP back. So that's always really, really strong. But she unfortunately is going to be missing out on that by just a mere 10%, because you're not going to be able to loop this back for at least 30%. Unless, I don't know, maybe they give Oberon a buff in the future and he, bumps instead of giving 70% to 80%. That'd be a little bit nuts. But they did at the very least give her this little bit of a synergy with her own NP, because she's going to increase the healing rate received over here, and she does heal her own HP over here on the overcharge for her NP. So it's kind of like a little bit of synergy. It's nice enough if you don't have an AoE Saber clearer, I suppose, because, she is on the friend point gacha, and you can get her to NP5 if you want to put in the work and try to get her, but they didn't really do her too many favors by only giving her the 20% over here. So that is a little bit unfortunate, but who knows? Maybe in the future they'll buff some of these other skills over here and they'll actually help her out. Now we have Mozart over here, who I was kind of just talking about. So this originally is just like reducing an enemy servant's NP damage, but if you don't know what Mozart does, he bombs 50 stars, and he also gives everybody a pretty big arts buff, and so to kind of compile on that, he's also able to reduce the enemy's arts resistance over here. So if you want to use him as, like, I don't know, a poster girl target where you kind of slap a taunt on him, have him run in there, drop a bunch of like buffs for your entire party, guaranteeing that everybody gets to do a crit for your first turn, and then giving them a massive arts buff, as well as letting them really smack the enemy for some nice arts damage by also lowering their resistance. He can be kind of good for that, although you probably do have better options. But let's say you're more free to play. Maybe you don't have Castorias, or you don't have Lady Avalons, you don't even have Tamamo or something. Maybe this guy actually then becomes a fairly decent option for just being able to come in and allow you to do some nice kind of burst damage, but this does last for 3 turns, so you'll kind of feel it for the first couple of turns. It is relatively nice. But then we have, I think, the first Big Mac Daddy, like the actual huge first massive buff. So Ozymandias got this buff over here earlier, right? And some people were like, okay, it seems good, but it's a little restrictive. You have to be on the sunlight battlefield. This doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Well, then they were like, oh, hold on, hold my beer for a second. But bam, we buffed his NP. So not only is he doing more damage now, which is always really nice, but he grants himself the sunlight battlefield buff for 5 turns, essentially saying that you're always going to have this up. Because if you can't fire an Ozymandias NP every 5 turns, at least once every 5 turns, you're probably doing something wrong. But then for some reason they were like, you know what if we just reduced his skill cooldown by 1 every time he fires his NP, which makes him a little bit more nutty, because this in effect becomes a 4-turn cooldown skill, this becomes a 5, this becomes a 4 as well, and this is Imperial privilege. Like, this stuff is really good. Even if you don't have these up at the same time, if you can nail either one of these buffs even while this is down, bro becomes a little bit nutty, right? Because that is a 40% attack and a 40% defensive buff. Either one of those is really crazy. The dude just becomes real nuts because he just becomes super thick and is able to do real solid damage, while also kind of being a pseudo support by providing stars for the party, giving everybody crit damage, and then, you know, every 5 turns basically charging the party's NP gauge. And that's every 5 turns worst case scenario. You can definitely spam this a lot more frequently than that, and Ozzy just becomes a really, really strong option. Then we have Mata Hari. This one's a little bit more, I guess, more low to the ground, a bit more reserved. It's nice as kind of like a budget type option thing, because now she's like, oh yeah, here's like 50% crit damage to the entire party. Like, that's not bad. That's Waver's crit skill to everybody. It's not the worst thing in the world. She's low cost. I guess if you really want to use someone like Mata Hari, it can be nice, but she definitely does need the star gen over here, because while she is an assassin, she's got the, you know, natural ability to really gen stars. She doesn't have the presence concealment over here, really weirdly enough. Like, she's got the high natural star gen, but her hits are really low. They didn't give her presence concealment, and her NP is art, so it's not like she has the ability to drop stars on her NP. She's a very, very weird servant, and I'm like, I guess this might be kind of a good step in the right direction, but like a lot of these older servants, one of the more fundamental issues that's holding them back is their low hit counts, right? This is definitely hurting them out a lot. And I think they're going to need to do something in the future to really help that out. But, I mean, it's nice enough. It's like a little budget crit support thing, I guess, if you really do need it. Then we have the Ann and Bonnie over here. Now, they similarly had kind of a doo-doo water skill over here, but this is actually kind of nice because it starts to play into their niche a little bit, because they really want to be at 1 HP, right? They have this whole gimmick over here that the lower their HP is, the more damage they do. And so you really want them to just get smacked up, and you really want them to just be able to do massive damage at 1 HP. So they gave them a Guts, which is very nice. It's a Guts that revives them at 1 HP, so it's a bit easier to get them to their maximum damage output. They also taunt themselves so they take all the damage, so hopefully they can start taking some hits, but they didn't give them like any defensive skills, right? They didn't give them anything like, oh, here's a defensive buff to like try to keep yourself alive. They're like, no, 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 no. We want them to get beat up, right? Like, there's nothing here to keep them alive. They just got the Guts because they want to be as low as possible. And then to also ensure that after taking all that damage, you should be able to fire an NP, they get an NP gain boost over here. So like whenever you do a Brave Chain that turn, plus all the damage you take, you should be able to clap back with an NP. And it makes them interesting to use, right? Because especially because they have a very high NP gain stat already, it does make them like an interesting servant. They're not great still, right? They're not like the most crazy thing, but they become like a fun little option. They become like more usable, I would say. Like, you can actually make use of them and actually try to do something, as opposed to them being just kind of hot dog water before. And then we have Hassan over here, and Hassan just gets a massive glow up because this NP is... it's just a wet noodle, right? It does literally no damage, right? As someone who used Hassan a lot as like my go-to assassin when I started playing the game, I was one of the weirdos that did not use Kojiro. I was like, I'm gonna use Hassan because he's got triple dodge and he can drop a bunch of stars. It's real cool, but they actually gave him a little bit of a glow up over here. So for one, I absolutely love that if he fires his NP, he just gets 50% back. They're like, you know what? This thing is going to be hitting like a wet paper towel anyway. Just let him fire another NP, and for the love of God, give him some type of offensive buff. Because weirdly enough, this guy has no way to buff his offenses at all, right? He can, you know, buff his crit star generation. He can drop a lot of stars. He can keep himself alive. He can kind of crit, but he had like no buffs at all. He doesn't even have like a passive quick buff, right? That's how down bad this was. So they're like, okay, give him the attack buff, please. And then maybe with the 50%, you know, that he gets off of his own NP, maybe you can stack some of these together to do some semblance of damage, right? The only unfortunate thing is that it's tied to his insta-kill, right? Like, all of this, I had nothing but praise for, but then this kind of kills it a little bit. This makes it a little bit stinky. So, yeah, like, it's a neat idea, I suppose. Like, you know, maybe have him insta-kill one of the mobs that's next to the main boss, and then maybe he can then pop off. But if you're gonna bring him as like a single target as a boss killer, it doesn't really do a whole lot for you. So I don't know, it's neat. It's definitely like good, quote unquote, I suppose, right? Like, because you could try to insta-kill some low rarity mobs, but I don't know, very situational at best. You're probably not going to use him, which makes me really sad because he was my starting assassin. There we have Cersei over here, which Cersei doesn't get like too much over here. She just gets like a nice little offensive buff by buffing her own NP, and she can remove the enemy's offensive buffs as well. So not only is she getting a little bit stronger, but she'll prevent them from, you know, clapping her too hard. But it's really nothing super insane. It's not like the craziest thing in the world. Leonidas, I think, is really interesting. And not unlike a Hassan interesting, where it's like, oh, this is like a situational type buff. It's like, oh, if you're actually going to use Leonidas, this is pretty nice. So he gives himself this guts over here that is stackable with other guts. That's very, very nice. And then whenever he pops his guts, very similarly to, say, Heracles' buff last year, whenever his guts is procced, he's going to start buffing the party's attack. So instead of being selfish, kind of like Herc over there, instead of that, he's more or less buffing the party with a charisma. And he already gives them a buster buff over here, so if you have this going with this, he kind of is filling this pseudo support type role. Like, he's able to, you know, draw the attention of the enemies over here. Then whenever he's drawing attention, if he's starting to, you know, die, for lack of a better term, he'll start giving you this 20% attack buff with this buster buff. And his own NP is not terrible, right? He bombs some stars, 25, because you should have him at NP 5. He's a 2-star in the friend point gacha. And then he also taunts again for 3 more turns, right? Like, Leonidas is definitely not a bad low rarity option. I think, while he's not like one of the dummy, nutty, crazy buffs that some of these other people got, like some of the, well, the others that we'll talk about as we go through here, but he definitely got a very, very nice solid buff. I like what they did with Leonidas. And as a fan of Babylonia, I'm glad that this guy is actually becoming more and more playable. I think that's really cool. Now, here we get another one of the more crazy ones. I don't know why Ku Fulin over here really needed this. I don't know why they were like, you know, Jalter, not soloing things well enough. Let's give him a really crazy buff. And basically over here, he's getting more NP damage, sure, but now the dude just can't be stopped. Like, he just yeets all of the enemy's defensive buffs. It makes him a really nice mid-range soloer, like in between someone like Super Orion and in between someone like Qi Shi Huang, where he might not be as tanky as Qi Shi Huang, being like a ruler and everything, and he might not output the 1 billion crits that Super Orion is able to do. But as a Berserker, he's still able to put up really good damage. He can't really be stopped. Not as good as Super Orion's Pierce Invincibility that kind of just gets through it, but it's still nice on bosses that can have their buffs removed. And then he's also got a nice balance of, you know, survivability. Like, the guts with the 2 dodges over here is very nice in, you know, comparison with him being a Berserker. So it's like a nice little balance that he's got stuff to keep him around while also being really offensive. This one I think is really, really nice. And, you know, as someone who really does like Jalter, he's one of my favorite male characters in the game. I'm really excited to claim this guy with my ticket and start using him to run amok everywhere. I'm just going to start using this guy as a DPS because I'm not a huge fan of soloing, but I'm really excited for this one. This one is really good. I'm almost as excited for this one as another one, and I'm pretty sure some people that know me know what wifey servant I'm talking about. I really like their buff because it's simple, but it's really good. Now, Ku Proto over here also gets an NP buff over here. This one I think is kind of nice. The piercing defense kind of fits in line with the other Ku also being able to pierce defense with Gaebulg. It's like a nice little consistency thing. And then they also give him a nice little quick buff over here. So if you do happen to be fighting like wild beast people over here, like, you can get your buffs to start multiplying into each other. Gives them a little bit of extra damage because you get a higher damage scaling whenever they buff your NP, as you can see right here, the, you know, actual percentages go up. But then this is also giving him just a little bit of extra damage, and then it's going to make any follow-up quick cards just a little bit better. Again, it does still suffer a little bit from the low hit count of being a year 1 servant. Like, if we bump this up to like 3-4 hits, then you might actually be able to start doing some real sick, nasty like looping with this dude, because his natural NP gain is crazy. But I can also see that's why they're like, maybe we don't want to buff the hits of some of these older servants because it might make them a little too good at their job. But come on, he's a 3-star servant. Let him be let him be good, man, because my man Ku Proto over here, I love Prototype, and he's always kind of just been relegated to being that other Ku that nobody uses. And then we have Jalter. Now, this is the one that I'm really excited for. So Jalter's NP is already really good, and as a servant, she's kind of in that same territory as, say, someone like Gilgamesh, right? Where pre-New Year's buff for Gilgamesh, I was really baffled at how they were going to buff him because his kit is so basic but universally good that adding something too good on there might just make him go from like 0 to 100 overnight, right? And Jalter's the same thing. Like, Jalter's kit, she's got just enough to always pretty much keep her relevant. Like, her crits are always going to bite. She's got the highest attack in the game as of me recording this video. Who knows if they drop a ludicrous servant for anniversary on JP and they make just, you know, it's like, oh, Jalter's got 14,000 attack over here. Hold my beer. This person's going to have like 16,000 attack. I don't know if they're just going to lose their marbles on that, but she's got a strong charisma that even if she can't buff herself with this, it still multiplies into herself. And even though this is kind of like a burst damagey thing, she's kind of got everything she needs, right? She doesn't have a battery or anything, but she doesn't really need it because a slight gust of wind comes her way and she just refunds like her entire NP. So I guess the only thing that they were like, okay, what can we give Jalter that's really good, but it doesn't make her more broken, it just makes her more consistent. Boom, they allow her to drop 30 stars every time she fires her NP, which I think is very nice. So it gives her a slight damage buff by buffing her NP, increasing the damage scaling, but then it also drops 30 stars, so it makes a lot of these like more crit focused builds a lot easier and like more consistent, right? Because one of the things that Jalter does struggle with is that if she was more modern, her star rate over here would probably be like one of those 5,000% star weights that we're seeing a lot of more modern units get to help them absorb their stars, because even sometimes this 800% is not nearly enough with her absolutely abysmal star weight over here, right? So being able to drop 30 in conjunction with her already being able to kind of drop a fair bit of stars, because her quick card's not terrible and her extra attack does have high hits despite her natural star gen being terrible. But if you've used Jalter, you know, in like a Brave Chain, she can drop a fair bit of stars, right? Like, she's not terrible. Especially with this 30, it makes it a bit more consistent, right? It lets her actually collect some of those stars and actually gain access to some of her crits. And in fact, in some Brave Chains, she can actually kind of reach up to that 50 stars where she can guarantee all the crits. Although I do think you need some more specific Brave Chains for that one. But yeah, she gets a lot better after that. Then we gotta dive back down because then there's Mephistopheles. I don't know how like good they really could have made this and made people care, so they just slapped an attack buff on here and it's like, oh, whoop-de-doo, bro, we got a 30% attack. But I kid, but he really did need this. I just used him for the first time during the tower event because I've had no need to actually use him. And so when that came around, I was like, oh yeah, surely like Mephistopheles can clear these like 20k enemies, and bro was absolutely struggling. So thank God they gave him this 30% attack buff, because Lord knows he needs it. This is kind of interesting because while we don't really get enemies that recover large amounts of HP too commonly, every now and then you have those like Demeter bosses that maybe at some point after a couple of buffs, maybe Mephistopheles will be good for. Maybe this will be like a nice gag strategy or something. I don't know. We'll see what they do with him going forward, but at the end of the day, it's Mephistopheles. Does anybody actually care? Now we have kind of a sick, nasty one over here. We have Irrational's buff. Now, this one is kind of nutty because all they give her is a special damage mod against Earth people, right? And that would have been crazy enough. Like, if it was just this, we'd be cooking. But then they just fill this thing out with like crit chance resistance. Now everybody's immune to insta-kill. And the damage is getting buffed over here. They didn't have to do all this, right? These are just nice little icings on the cake. They just make her better and more difficult content, because as you guys know, Irrational is one of those like AoE servants that is really nice in more hard content, right? I believe she's like one of the few servants that could solo that weird it's like the Nobu, Jaguar Man, and Jean Archer node where like they swap their the fields and they get different buffs. Irrational is like one of those servants that could kind of go in there and actually solo it, just because she has a really nice kit for like a lot of these challenge quests. And they didn't have to add these on here. They didn't have to make her just like that much better, these little bits of random support that she's now giving people, because she was already giving people the attack buff, right? And she was already giving people these just nice defensive buffs over here as well, giving everybody NP gain. She already had the 50% battery, man. She already had all this stuff, but now she's like, you know what if I was just doing it even more, right? And then the Earth attribute buff, this is in and of itself is already good enough. I have seen this woman, this beautiful lady, farm against sabers under the like Koyenskaya system, right? Like, I have seen her do the Lord's work. So as someone who has an Ereshkigal and has them grailed to 100, I am really excited to get to use her with this buff. Finally, there is Drake. Drake actually just has a really good buff. This one is just solid. It gives her the 30%, or I'm sorry, 20% Buster buff over here, and it lets her pierce defense, which with her third skill being able to pierce invincibility does make it nice. It gives her that duality of being able to kind of get around most bosses' defense. As I've said in some of the other videos, just having the pierce defense and the pierce invincibility kind of built into your kit is a bit better than the buff removal, because some bosses resist buff removal, so it does guarantee that no matter who you're bringing Drake against, she's going to be able to get through their defenses, right? They're not going to be able to stop her unless they start giving us more and more opponents that have solemn defense. But I doubt we'll run into that anytime soon. Realistically, I think if they want to give her like a special damage mod, I don't know if they want to rebuff the NP, but maybe on the first skill, right? Make these 3 turns, give her a special damage mod against... I mean, there's quite a few people you could give Drake a damage mod against, considering her history in the Fate franchise, right? You could give her an anti-Roman thing, you could give her an anti-Divine thing. She could be all over the place, right? Because Drake is all over the place. She's in like Extella, she's in Okeanos, she's everywhere, right? She's Mr. World, or I guess Mrs. Worldwide, I guess, right? Quite literally, actually, but... yeah, I'd be curious to see what they give her in the future, because Drake is one of those servants that is just kind of like the homie lady. We like Drake. She's real cool. But yeah, I'd be curious to see what they're going to do with her in the future. But yeah, that's all the buffs that we're going to be getting for the 6th anniversary. They're all quite good. Some are a little disappointing. Like, I really think it's short-sighted to give Saber Lily a 20% battery when you just released Koyanskaya, but maybe they didn't want this free-to-play Saber to be too good, right? They didn't want everybody to be running around with Saber Lily farming things. They're like, no, go use the actual limited servants. Go summon for the real guys, right? Maybe that's what they're trying to do, but then again, they also did turn Irrational over here into like kind of a nutty farming lady. Same thing for Drake. Like, they get really good as Buster farmers with the new damage mod and the extra Buster damage that she has now. So maybe that was the scheme the whole time. They're like, the free-to-play, we held back a little bit. Our limited guys, we made them nuts. We made them real good. So I don't know, Lesengle, or I guess technically it was DW who had, they made the buffs because they were in charge at the time when this originally came out. So DW, I'm on to you guys, but Lesengle, I'm still on to you as well. But anyway, let me know you guys' thoughts in the comments down below. Which buff are you most looking forward to? And I guess also let me know which buff you're just like, bro, why did they even bother giving this person a buff, right? Let me know all that in the comments down below. And I will catch you guys in the next video. Peace, late guys.